response is, to what extent do we need that representation in our characterizations of divinity to make that more real or something like that? I don't know. And I think the real issue for Plato is, if the assumption traditionally is that that which is good is a representation of the divine, right? That divinity, in a certain sense, is supposed to represent the maximum morality. And at that point, that's where these very human flaws are showing up. Then that is a philosophical problem for how we represent divinity. Like, that there's a philosophical issue here, not just a image-driven issue. And now from this he's moved towards the sun as being that representation of the ultimate good, or the cause from which all other good radiates. You see what I'm saying? It's not Zeus, you know what I mean? It's the sun, right? And that, I think that one of the reasons why that shift has to be made is to at least to maintain some sort of purity, right, in that thing which is supposed to be, that thing which goodness and truth is supposed to emanate from. So I think that there is I do think that there's a relationship between the considerations of the role of the poets as the previous educational system, right, and how he's trying to critique that, right, in this allegory, basically through most of this text, is saying there's something about that educational system that doesn't get us to where we need to go. And part of the problem with that is because the highest authority, the gods, are so flawed. So we need a moral standard that's beyond. I mean, he's not painting, the sun with with a human face on it like Raisin Bran. You know what I mean? like he's using metaphors now that are radically not anthropomorphized in the way that, and that helps us to separate, I think, conceptually now what goodness is and what the form of goodness is from what we are and all of our issues, right? Another thing I will say too, and we're going to get into this, is that it's about turning the rational part. So that this holistic thing, this paideia thing is holistic. It's about turning and orienting the rational part of our soul towards that good thing. And I think this is part of the problem when you come back into the darkness, right? Is that once you've been oriented, once you have adjusted to seeing reality, being able to study the stars as they are, being able to study the world as it really is, once you've been oriented towards that, turned towards that, it becomes really hard then to shed all that and remain in the darkness. Because it's the whole body, it's the whole thing being moved. It's not just a visual thing, it's not just a passing experience. I think I saw a lot of hands raised. Yeah, go ahead.
This passage actually makes me kind of think of the apology, because when he's talking about coming out of the darkness into the light, he's kind of referencing how why would the people that know care rather than not the ignorant. But I think of that, and then kind of implying that there is like a knowledge and that maybe some people have it, whereas in the quality like wisdom is like understanding you don't know. So like it kind of makes me think of like perpetual, is even ones that are outside of the cave, is that really reality? And like, perpetuates itself.
I think that there is the question. Now that we're clearly kind of talking about Socrates in this text, I think there is the question of why Socrates would take all the risk, would risk his life to be the gadfly. We've talked about the motivations of the citizen, but we haven't really talked that much about the motivations of Socrates. And I think this is now becoming more psychological, and we can start talking about the motivation of Socrates and why he felt compelled to go in there and try to play some sort of role, and felt that being a philosopher, something that he had something to offer the polis. But I don't think the notion of what wisdom is from the Apology, which I think it would probably be something that Socrates would have said pretty close, is the same notion of wisdom, knowledge, or truth that Plato is working with at this point. That would be one thing I would say has changed. Now we've got Plato's words in Socrates' mouth versus something that's probably more accurate, more the real historical Socrates before. So I think that things have kind of moved a little bit there.
When
back to Kevin's point, I saw that in the text that they see the utility of the poems as educating the people from the get-go. So I saw that, Plato or Socrates removes all the vices from that, because, I see it as, they look at it as, age, experience, and education, then you can kind of become immune to, and then like later on, he does expose the guardians to the vices, to like test them out, but they already have education to back them up.
But in the developmental phase, there is a purity argument being made here. And that's why I say I think it's different than the argument about education you're saying. With this guy, it's like there's plenty of people that are familiar with the vice. That doesn't mean that our leaders should be part of those people, right? That in their developmental phase, there's a certain kind of purity in this whole myth and metal stuff. There's a certain kind of purity that they're trying to get, to choose from, and then maintain, so that there's a maximum amount of possibility that this education is going to stick to this thing, right? And give these people the right sensibilities, right? For doing lots of different things. There's another metaphor we're going to use. You guys have heard this term, dyed in wool. There's actual metaphor in here about the dyed in wool comes out of this text that we're going to touch on at some point. So there is a purity piece that's going on here. But the purity is there so that this education can take an effect. And that is not that the education itself doesn't have to spend its entire time deconstructing stuff that's all, bad furniture that's already on, right? That it can just attach and move on. Let me go to another passage here that I think sets up. So on page 190, we got 518C. Between B and C, Kevin, why don't you read this? It starts, if that's true.
If that's true, then here's what we must think about these matters. Education isn't what some people declare it to be, namely putting knowledge into souls that lack it, like putting sight into blind eyes, if you say that. But our present discussion, on the other hand, shows that the power to learn is present in everyone's soul, and that the instrument with which each learns is like an eye that cannot be turned around from darkness to light without turning the whole body. This instrument cannot be turned around from that which is coming into being without turning the whole soul until it is able to study that which is and the brightest thing that is, namely the one we call the good. Isn't that right? Yes. Then education is a craft concerned with doing this very thing, this turning around, and with how the soul can most easily and effectively be made to do it. It isn't the craft of putting sight into the soul. Education takes for granted that sight is there, but that it isn't turned the right way or looking where it ought to look, and it tries to redirect it appropriately. So it seems. Now, it looks as though the other so-called virtues of the soul are akin to those of the body, for they really aren't there beforehand, but are added later by habit and practice. However, the virtue of reason seems to belong above all to something more divine, which never loses its power, but is either useful and beneficial or useless and harmful, depending on the way it is turned. Okay. Or have you never noticed...
That's good enough. Did you see how this kind of builds on the conversation we've been having?
Yes.
And then, finally on this page, I'm going to say it is our task as founders, right? Can somebody read? Shep, can you read this thing? It is our task as founders, then.
It's our task as founders, then, to compel the best natures to do study which set before is the most important. Namely, to make the sense see the good, and see the good. When they've made it and looked sufficiently, we mustn't allow them to do what they're allowed to do today. What's that? To stay there and refuse to go down again to the prisoners in the cave and share their labors and honors, whether they're of less worth or of greater. Then are we to do them an injustice by making them live a worse life when they could live a better one? You're forgetting again that it isn't the law's concern to make any one class in the city outstandingly happy, but to contrive and spread happiness throughout the city by bringing the citizens into harmony with each other throughout persuasion or compulsion, and by making them share with each other beliefs that the benefits that each class can confer on the community. The law produces such people in the city, not in order to allow them to turn in whatever direction they want, but to make use of them to bind the city together.
All right. Yeah, so what's that? What's that all about?
The purpose of the government is not to favor individual class of citizens intended to benefit the greater good rather than the greater good intended to benefit a certain class. This is the critique of facilities.
Once.
Also, I thought it was interesting because it's like whenever you make them return, it's not that you have to tell them, like the people that don't know the truth. It's more you have to guide with the truth. And not exactly come in and say, hey, look, you're wrong, this isn't right. Guiding them with the knowledge. You don't exactly have to tell them. So much so as, like, coach them into it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so there's a pedagogical aspect on how do you, if you know you're going to be resented, how do the people that go back in the cave compel the folks through, what is the argument, persuasion or whatever, compel the people to listen to them? That's kind of a pedagogical thing. It's teachers have to figure out how to sell the truth in a certain way. If they believe they have it. But what else is going on in this passage too? What else? There's a lot going on.
Well, there's that question as well about happiness, getting back to what's the happy life and what is the duty of the law and goodness. Is it for one person to be as happy as possible, or for many people to be a little bit happy? So, and Plato seems to think that's this duty is that, you know, if you have the knowledge, instead of being selfish and being as happy as you can be, you'll spread it in maximum utility.
Yeah.
And I think that really ties back into Plato's argument about the city, about citizenship, and as the guardian or as philosopher king, it's your, like, if you know the truth in the form of good, and you see in the light that it's your obligation to the city who's giving the opportunity to see this light, to then go back and lead and guide.
And the city's kind of funding this too, right?
Yeah.
They're providing financial aid.